Very good. Welcome to all of you, wherever you may be, whatever your time zone and whatever your age. I'm very pleased to welcome you to our webinar, Meaningful Adolescent and Youth Engagement and Partnership in Sexual and Reproductive Health Programming, a strategic planning guide of the HIPS. And my name is Sylvia Wong of UNFPA, the United Nations Population Fund, which is one of the co-sponsors for the High Impact Practices on Family Planning and part of the IBP network, which is proudly hosting and organize this webinar for you today. And I have pleasure to serve as your moderator on this topic that is very dear to me, having worked together with and for young people on their sexual and reproductive health and rights, and more recently on innovation design powered by and with young people around the world. Now, on today's agenda, we have a really great program, as you'll see, an exciting lineup of speakers sharing different angles of what meaningful adolescent and youth engagement and participation entails. You'll see that we'll hear from USAID, an overview of the strategic planning guide, as well as a country perspective from Ghana. And we'll have Q&A and the closing afterwards. But before we begin, just to share a few housekeeping notes. One is that the webinar will be recorded. So there will be an opportunity for you to be able to view it, share it, and engage with the webinar after it's concluded. Be sure to also visit our website, and you can see the URL at the bottom, to be able to access other webinars on the HIPS. And finally, you will note that during this webinar, you can submit your questions at any time. You can use the chat, or you can use a function, as you'll see on the right-hand side of the slide. And be sure to download the handouts, because there is a great wealth of information, materials, and resources for you on family planning high impact practices. So to provide a bit of context about this webinar, just want to share that it's part of a learning and dissemination series on the high impact practices. And what are they? You will note that they are evidence-based family planning practices. They've been reviewed, vetted by experts against specific criteria, and they're documented in an easy-to-use format, because we know that there's so much information out there. Where do you go? How do you find it? But here you can find it in an easily usable and adaptable manner. So that's what the HIPS are about. Next slide, please. And you'll see that there are different categories of HIPS. They're grouped in three primary ones, such as the enabling environment, which addresses systemic barriers that affect an individual's ability to access family planning information services. There is a group on service delivery itself, as you can see, about access, availability, acceptability, and quality. And there is a set of HIPS on social and behavior change, so crucial to influence the knowledge, beliefs, norms associated with accessing contraception, especially for young people. Finally, you'll note that there are different HIPS that encourage enhancements and how approaches can be used in conjunction with the HIPS to really maximize impact for family planning, reach, and scale. Here you can see that there's quite a large library of HIPS that define the different practices and summarize the evidence. And do check it out, because you could see from this slide that there are a number of key topics that we believe would be able to support your efforts with and for young people to enable access to contraceptive information and services. So with today's webinar, again, as I mentioned, we are going to introduce this new HIP strategic planning guide on adolescent and youth engagement and partnerships. And the guides themselves are thematic and outline a strategic process to identify the most effective and efficient investments in programs. And this particular HIP is especially timely because we know youth leadership and participation has been around for some time, and it has come a long way. And it's absolutely a must in our programming. And because we are talking about partnerships with adolescents and youth in all their diversity, and we're not talking about them as targets or beneficiaries, but as true actors, leaders, champions, and partners in our collective efforts. And why not? Because today's young people are 1.8 billion strong, and they are growing up in an ever-changing world, one that will reach 8 billion this year in a few months. And so if we can just imagine the power and potential of this generation of young people to make real change and difference in our lives and in generations to come. And we know that youth-led and youth-serving organizations, young feminist groups, governments, community leaders, UN entities, civil society, academia, the private sector, the media, all have a role to play. And UNFPA has been a long-standing champion with and for young people to support their rights and choices. And whether that be supporting these and working directly with these partners in all the countries around the world. But we also know that bringing about change rests on shared leadership and shared responsibility. And as a global community, we know that this can be difficult to do in practice. And over many years, we've seen different iterations of youth leadership models. Some have worked well, and some where there is room for growth and improvement. And so this webinar really aims to look at that. How might we go beyond the rhetoric and truly partner with adolescents and youth in a meaningful way that involves exactly shared leadership and ownership? And what does success look like? How might we reach how might we share accountability so we know that we've reached that tipping point for true adolescent and youth engagement and partnership? So we do have an exciting program ahead, and I'm glad that you're with us today. So let me introduce our first speaker, and you'll see the panelists. We're diverse in our location and our background, but we all share a common interest and passion working with and for young people. And our first speaker is Ms. Amy Uccello of USAID. She is Senior Youth and Reproductive Health Technical Advisor at the Office of Population and Reproductive Health. And Amy, she's going to share a global perspective on what meaningful engagement with adolescents and youth and partnership really entails at USAID. Over to you, Amy, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. Appreciate the warm welcome, and welcome to everyone on the call. So good morning. My name is Amy Uccello. I'm the Senior Youth Advisor at the Office of Population and Reproductive Health in USAID. And I've been asked to set the stage for the webinar, while my co-presenters will talk about the development and structure of the Meaningful Adolescent and Youth Engagement Strategic Planning Guide. I'd like to take a few moments to introduce 3 areas of consideration and how this resource can be used. We heard earlier about many helpful high-impact practice products. Among other things, strategic planning guides offer implementers practical guidance on how to apply a high-impact practice and help us elevate our family planning and reproductive health outcomes by zeroing in on certain areas. And the MAYE Strategic Planning Guide does just that. Guides implementers on ways to bring youth voice forward in FPRH for improved resonance, quality, and success. There's been an incredible evolution of MAYE, as Sylvia mentioned, over the years, and this important resource is but one example of the importance that the FP community puts on meaningfully engaging youth in our work. Having said that, here are a few additional considerations. Number 1, MAYE is no longer nice to have. It's time for the international community to expand MAYE work beyond the usual suspects. There have been real forward-leading organizations working in this space. However, others continue to lag a bit behind. We know that it can be challenging to introduce something new and near impossible if leadership does not see the value or does not feel that it's a requirement in FPRH, MCHN, or other integrated health efforts. To support that frustration, next, I'm pleased to tell you that the 2022 updated USAID Youth in Development Policy has doubled down on youth engagement, partnership, and leadership. The policy prioritizes youth as emerging leaders and vital partners in development and includes operational guidance for USAID missions and global platforms to better support youth partnership. As such, you should see more encouragement from USAID to bring MAYE into your work. For example, the policy has encouraged the Global Health Bureau to better track progress in this space, and we will soon be rolling out standard indicators on youth leadership. Most offices within the Bureau have already prioritized MAYE, and with more capacity being built in this area by tools such as this SPG, there will be a greater expectation that more implementers are incorporating this work into their programs. Some of us are even advocating for procurement language that would require youth partnerships in all new programs. It's exciting to see this renewed support for MAYE, and we hope that it encourages those who have been reticent thus far to join us. Which leads me to consideration number 2. It's time to deepen and strengthen our efforts in MAYE. As the space evolves, it's clear that not all MAYE efforts are created equal. There are several groups that are digging deep, bringing youth leadership to the national level, incorporating MAYE into all phases of programming, and letting youth lead in key conversations about healthcare quality using youth-led social accountability. However, most are still just scratching the surface. MAYE has been mostly found in familiar places. Youth creativity has been brought into several project designs, and the health field has been outrageously successful, sending out an army of youth health promoters and mobilizers. However, these efforts do not necessarily represent the deep and sustained involvement we hope for in MAYE. They tend to keep youth as participants rather than as partners. It's great to see this work, but there's always room for improvement. To begin considering youth as partners, partners rather than participants may take a real shift in power, since age biases still persist around youth capabilities. Institutions should ask whether the youth involvement they support remains as a series of one-off assignments or plans for success. As one-off assignments, or if their participation is systematically woven into decision-making and plans for success. Real commitment by institutions might look like changes to organizational charters, structure, and culture, resources dedicated to fund youth capacity building so that they have the skills to contribute equally. And I would add patience when stepping into new spaces where there is still plenty to be learned. This is not only a call to implementers, but to donors as well. There are forward-thinking youth-led institutions asking donors to better involve youth to decide how development resources are prioritized and the type of programs that should be created. Lastly, I want to mention how youth engagement can be more representative of different populations. Next. A key principle to the USAID youth policy is to ensure inclusive development. There is more that can be done to better include all subsets of youth in FPRH, including youth with disabilities, LGBTQI+ youth, youth with differing gender identities, Indigenous youth, etc. The FPRH field still has much to learn about how best to serve and partner with diverse youth populations. Next. Finally, I'd like to end with a reminder, MAYE is not only for youth projects and programs alone. Next, the beauty of an SPG is that it's intended to be used in connection with all high impact practices as appropriate. Next, if we look at the language from the SPG itself, it says that the MAYE can improve SRHR outcomes writ large. It does not say only those projects aimed at youth. Youth have a right to engage, but are also worthwhile contributions to the FPRH space. For example, next slide. There are 3 categories according to the policy of youth projects. Youth focused, where youth are the primary participants. Youth relevant, where a project activity includes youth but is not necessarily focused on youth. And of course, youth-led, where youth leadership is at the forefront. Beyond these three areas, it can also be helpful to have youth voices in general FPRH discussions, as they are community leaders, they're business owners, they're sometimes providers, and more. Next. I hope that these considerations inspire you as you learn about the MAYE SPG and how to best utilize it going forward. Thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you so much, Amy, for your overview. And I really like the fact that you really offer three concrete considerations when thinking about how to apply the MAYE, that it's no longer a nice to have, it has to be sustained and not one-off. And we can go beyond just youth-specific projects, because young people are active in all spheres of life, whether beyond health, they're in education, they're in labor, they're in different industries. So thanks so much for really offering these important points from USAID for our consideration. So now our next speaker is Alan Harlandia, the Executive Director of IYAFP. He is one of the lead authors on this guide, and you can see his bio up on the screen. And he will give us an overview of this resource and how it can strategically help organizations, policymakers, youth activists, program managers strategically put these concepts into practice. So over to you, Alan.
Thank you. Thank you, Sylvia. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, to everyone that joined us today. I will do my best to walk you through some of the key elements of the meaningful adolescent and youth engagement and partnership in sexual and reproductive health programming, a strategic planning guide through this presentation. So let's move on to the next slide, please. This strategic planning guide is intended to lead program managers, planners, and decision makers through a strategic process to meaningfully and effectively engage and partner with adolescents, youth, and/or youth-led organizations on sexual and reproductive health programs and initiatives. It aims to facilitate meaningful and equitable engagement and partnership with young people in general. This is a 4-page document. It is not too long, so I invite you all to review it in detail after this webinar, as I'm only speaking about some of the core elements of this guide. So let's move on to the next slide, and let's talk about the process of developing this SPG. As you can see on the screen, a literature review was conducted, first of all, taking into account both peer-reviewed and great literature about meaningful adolescent and youth engagement, positive youth development, and related topics. And then we conducted consultations with young people from different parts of the world in 4 languages: English, Spanish, French, and Arabic. And an additional consultation with representatives from different stakeholders from our field. This included donors, youth serving, and youth-led organizations as well. So after the consultations, we embarked in an iterative process of drafting, feedback, and redrafting. And thank you for everyone that provided feedback through the development process of this strategic planning guide. It's important to mention that this SPG utilizes a definition from the Global Consensus Statement on Meaningful Adolescent and Youth Engagement, which defines meaningful engagement as an inclusive, intentional, mutually respectful partnership between adolescents, youth, and adults, whereby power is shared, respective contributions are valued, and young people's ideas, perspectives, skills, and strengths are integrated into the design and delivery of programs, strategies, policies, funding mechanisms, and organizations that affect their lives and their communities, countries, and world. So when we are speaking about meaningful adolescent and youth engagement through these strategic planning guide, we're specifically making reference to this concept. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Okay, I am sure that you all are already convinced about the importance of engaging and partnering with young people. So I am only going to stress 3 of the reasons of why it is important. First of all, meaningful adolescent and youth engagement is a right. It also promotes positive youth development, and it also improves the quality and responsiveness of sexual and reproductive health programs, services, and policies. Even though most program managers and implementers are very convinced about the importance of meaningful engagement and partnership with young people, not everyone within organizations are convinced, and some key decision makers usually need to learn a little bit more about meaningful adolescent and youth engagement in order to implement the strategic planning guide and do May well. So let's move on to the next slide. Let me walk you through what we have called the 5 steps to meaningfully engage and partner with adolescents and youth. These are the 5 key steps that we've identified as essential for organizations to strategically partner and engage young people in a meaningful way. The first one is prepare your institution, project, or initiative to meaningfully engage and partner with youth. Of course, acknowledging that not all organizations are ready yet. 2, determine which youth to engage and the mechanisms of engagement and partnership. The third step is implement the engagement and partnership with youth. The fourth is monitor, measure, and be accountable. And the last step is sustain youth engagement and partnership. It's important to clarify that this is an iterative process. It's not a linear process. Different organizations might be at different stages in, for example, programs and projects, and they can go back and forth through these different steps throughout the project cycle, the program cycle, or in general in their strategies as an organization to engage and partner with young people. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Let's talk a little bit more about the first step, prepare for meaningful engagement and partnership. This is a very important step where organizations, projects, any institution in general needs to, first of all, conduct an internal assessment. What an organization needs to be ready to have all the systems in place to ensure they are able to meaningfully engage and partner with youth. And after conducting that internal assessment, of course, creating an action plan for needed changes. That can include, for example, updating policies that prevent your organization from compensating young people for their time, or training your staff on how to engage young people in a meaningful way. This is not a one-off activity, so it's not like organizations should do an internal assessment once. They create an action plan with a few steps, and then they forget about it. This is an ongoing process, and of course, change takes time, and there is always room to improve. So organizations are highly encouraged to conduct internal assessments, create action plans, and make adjustments as needed. The second step is determine which youth to engage in the mechanisms of engagement and partnership. So the first activity within this step is identifying intentionally which youth to engage. And of course, young people are a very, very diverse group. It's not an homogeneous population. And that's why identifying intentionally which youth we're aiming to engage is very important. So we definitely need to reach out to those youth that are aimed to be reached by the programs, the initiatives that we're trying to implement. And then we need to co-create with young people the scope, the purpose, and the mechanisms of engagement and partnership. This might sound a little abstract, so in the next slide, we present a few concrete examples of how this could look like. For example, as you can see on the screen, Young people can lead on research design, data analysis, and dissemination. Also, youth-led organizations could serve as a funded key partner in project team responsible for leading specific activities and initiatives. This could mean inviting young people to serve in decision-making structures or co-creating strategic plans with youth. So there are a variety of the scopes and mechanisms for engaging young people, and it's important to co-create the scope of it with youth. Let's move on to the next slide, and let's talk about the third step, of course. Now that we've determined the purpose and mechanisms of engagement, it's important to implement that engagement in partnership. And first of all, it needs to start by formalizing the process. And that means having a written agreement where we outline that scope, that purpose, the mechanisms of engagement, key like the timeline that we've agreed, etc. We realized through this process that the majority of organizations that engage young people or youth-led organizations use verbal agreements, not written agreements. And it's important to formalize the process of the partnership. Second, compensate youth fairly. I think that because of all the work around meaningful adolescent and youth engagement, this is not something controversial right now, or too controversial right now. I think that most organizations are convinced that they need to compensate youth fairly, and they have to engage in a honest, transparent communications with young people for designing the compensation. Of course, it's important to provide ongoing support throughout the collaboration. Young people, youth-led organizations are at different stages. They have different strengths and capacities. So providing ongoing support throughout the collaboration is very important. And also ensuring continuous trust building and learning. How can non-youth and youth create the spaces for discussion, collaboration, open communication, and knowledge sharing as well, to ensure that the partnership is not only about the concrete, deliverables or outputs that we've agreed on the reading agreement. So let's move on to the next step, please. Okay, so let's speak a little bit more about step 4, monitor, measure, and be accountable. It's important to measure and evaluate not only the activity or the project that we're working on as partners, but also the process, how the experience of the partnership and or engagement is going. So it's important to agree on key indicators and key moments, steps throughout the process to just take some time and evaluate, reflect how we're doing with regards to the partnership, the quality, as well of the engagement and the effectiveness of the activities that we're undertaking together, etc. So it's important to evaluate not only the project or the initiative that we're working together, but also the process of meaningfully engaging and partnering with youth. And in this regard as well, it is essential to co-create and implement accountability strategies. So those accountability strategies, of course, need to be co-created with young people and need to make sure that there are clear mechanisms for accountability throughout the collaboration. The last step is related to sustaining youth engagement and partnership. Of course, different organizations have different needs, different projects have different needs, budgets, etc. So there might be some instances where organizations are planning a short engagement and partnerships with youth-led organizations and youth in general. But through this strategic planning guide, we're aiming for organizations to think not only about the project, but also beyond the project. So how can organizations, even though, for example, for one specific project, the engagement might be short, can plan strategically and create opportunities for long-term relationships. So that's why it's important for organizations to strategically think about meaningful adolescent and youth engagement and integrate it at the beginning to ensure that, of course, even though for a specific project engagement might not be, very long, etc., but there can be continuous opportunities for engaging youth and the youth-led organizations they are working with. So these are some of these steps. Well, the 5 steps that we've identified as key for strategically engaging and partnering with young people. Let's move on to the next slide, please. So how can you use the SPG today? Well, first of all, we already said that it's important for organizations to conduct an internal assessment and say where we are at. Are we ready to partner with young people? Are our policies, preventing us to compensate young people fairly, etc.? Review and update your policies, systems, and processes throughout. When you read the complete strategic planning guide, you're going to identify that your organization might need to update some systems, some policies or processes to allow you to, follow the different actions that are suggested through the strategic planning guide. Adjust timelines for projects, etc., or incorporate in your general planning timelines, some specific considerations about, for example, negotiating with youth-led organizations about for compensation, the scope of work, etc., that sometimes it's not included from the beginning in the design and the timeline of the project. And well, organizations tend to just do it as they can. Of course, this SPG will support organizations to improve the level and the quality of partnerships with youth. It's important that we continue moving this narrative about meaningful adolescent and youth engagement forward and promote these equitable and trust-based partnerships for and with young people. And of course, as Sylvia mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, there are a variety of high impact practices, briefs, and strategic planning guides that resources are a lot, and they can be used in conjunction with these strategic planning guides. So it's not an alone document. It has also been designed thinking about the other strategic planning guides, especially those that specifically relate to young people. So we invite you all to review, read through, and take some concrete actions to implement this strategic planning guide within your organizations, institutions, and projects. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Thank you so much. I hope I was able to be as clear as possible. I invite you again to read in detail the strategic planning guide. It's not a long document. It's only a 4-page document. And I hope that it will provide organizations a guide on how to strategically do meaningful engagement and partnership with young people. Thank you, Sylvia, over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Alan. Really appreciated how you described the overall journey of preparing the document, looking at what's out there, how to move it to the next level, and your deep dive on the main steps that institutions can take. And really that they can start wherever they are, because there are meaningful steps to just move forward. And I'd want to encourage listeners to look at the guide, because there are examples of indicators of what Alan was speaking to, with how to be held accountable, how to measure what the success look like. And you can see some examples of indicators so you can track and measure the progress with and for young people. So thank you again, Alan. So our final speaker is Ms. Essie Asade-Pra. She is with MSI Choices of Ghana. And you can see her bio up there. She's a Ghanaian feminist with big interest in health policy and SRH, of health and rights. And she is also an ICFP 2020 Youth Trailblazer with a lot to share and to say about what youth participation looks like from a country's perspective, and especially from a large and implementing agency like MSI. So over to you, Essie. Welcome.
Thank you, Sylvia. So hello, everyone. It's like Sylvia mentioned, I'll give a bit of a country context and what we do at MSI Ghana in advancing youth participation across our programming. Next slide, please. So just to give a bit of a context, Ghana is a very youthful population. And whilst, of course, you don't necessarily need to have a youthful population structure to advance meaningful youth engagement, with our current demographic, it is imperative, regardless of what sector that you are in the country, to advance meaningful youth engagement because they are the largest constituent. And as a sexual reproductive health organization, given the country demographics of about 70% of young people being sexually active by age 20, low modern contraceptive prevalence rate, and a high unmet need for contraception amongst young people 10 to 19 years old, 57%. As an organization, we needed to think through what better way to engage young people and reach young people, especially as over the years, we had recorded a low adolescent and youth reach across our service delivery channels. And so to help us advance more responsive programming, one of the key strategies that, of course, we advanced, like Amy earlier mentioned, for us was advancing meaningful youth engagement. Next slide, please. And to do this, we tried several approaches. We learned along the way, some failed, but over the years, can we move to the next slide? Over the years, as we advanced in our programming, we had identified some key strategies, or some 4 key strategies that have really been transformative for us in reaching young people, in engaging young people, and ensuring that our programming was as responsive as possible. One of such key strategies that we had advanced was establishing a youth advisory board. And this we started even in the conceptualization of the youth advisory board itself, developing it with young people themselves. We had in-country youth consultants that had helped us conceptualize or develop a terms of reference for the youth advisory board, such that it would reflect what youth leaders themselves, or how youth leaders themselves would understood meaningful engagement and how they would want to be engaged by as an organization like that, like ours. And so in doing this, we then set the youth advisory board such that it sits strategically at the national level to ensure that all programs or projects implemented by MSI is responsive to young people's needs and the heterogeneous group of young people, because of course they are not a homogeneous group. And so for every project that MSI would have would implement, if we have when we have specific key youth indicators, this will be reviewed by the youth advisory board. And even in the proposal development, the conceptualization stage, the youth advisory board is engaged and advised. And then also, of course, as an organization that does SPCC a lot, we do a lot of INC material development. When it is youth focused, this is done directly or jointly with our youth advisory board and our marketing team. But even when we have integrated campaigns or integrated INC materials, this will be presented to the youth advisory board to review and make recommendations and adjustment for changes. Even when we need to engage maybe a focal influencer for a specific campaign, proposals will be received from the youth advisory board, and then the selected or the proposed influencer that the youth advisory board would indicate as being more youth responsive will be the one that will be selected by the organization. Also, we have, as a service delivery organization, we have our own youth-friendly service delivery models, and this is reviewed by the youth advisory board and monitored jointly with them as well. And then, of course, we believe that any meaningful change in the lives of young people must revolve around the pillars of demand, supply, and an enabling environment to ensure access to services. And so we have specific advocacy objectives that the country program advances to remove institutional and legal barriers to services. And most of these advocacy priorities are identified, and our advocacy interventions are implemented jointly with our Youth Advisory Board. The board itself also advances its own campaign or projects that they would then propose to the organization in response to a specific youth SRHR challenge. Beyond this, of course, whilst the Youth Advisory Board sits at the national level, we understand that there are still different categories of young people that a 9-member or an 11-member Youth Advisory Board may not effectively represent. And so we also advance strategic partnership with specific youth groups within our operational areas. So we have youth-led civil society organizations in country that we have long-term partnership with, some that we have an established MOU with, where we advance joint projects together. We sometimes advanced consortium level project with a youth specific organization, a youth led organization. And then of course, whilst education is free and compulsory in Ghana, and we know that the majority of the youth population are in school, we also strategically partner with student body groups and what we call student representative council leadership to implement in school specific jointly develop and implement in school specific youth programming. But like Amy said, meaningful youth participation should not just be limited to youth projects and programming. And so as an organization, we have an integrated committee approach where we have youth representation at specific departmental committees. For example, the organization has an internal advocacy committee that oversees all advocacy projects, develops and implements it jointly for the country program. And on this committee, we have a representation from our Youth Advisory Board that sits on that committee. We also have a social media or marketing committee that has representation from young people themselves, because whilst of course the activities are not necessarily entirely youth focused, it is cross-cutting, and young people, like Amy said, are really helpful in shaping ideas of such committees. We also have activity-specific planning committees for specific projects or activities that may not entirely be youth-focused, and for those that are strategically youth-focused but might go beyond the scope of our Youth Advisory Board. So, for example, we have a National Adolescent Reproductive Health Summit that is at the national level, jointly convened by MSI and the National Population Council, amongst other states and civil society partners. And on this planning committee, we would have representation from our key partner CSO, youth CSOs, and our Youth Advisory Board to ensure that that planning is as inclusive as possible. And we have other specific activities as a country program where we specifically set up a planning committee, because beyond our Youth Advisory Board, we would want to reach out to different categories of young people. And so we use this integrated committee approach to, as much as possible, advance an inclusive programming. And then, of course, the traditional way of youth engagement that I believe most of us have used, and it's also used by us. We work a lot with youth volunteers, not just in terms of peer education, but, or maybe in terms of service delivery, but also in performance tracking, young people serving as mystery clients. Of course, some of these engagements are also paid engagements as well, but not necessarily staff. They work as volunteers to either serve as mystery clients to ensure, monitor and track the responsiveness of our service delivery. We also work with volunteers in terms of social behavioral change communication, and as well as media engagement. But of course, in doing all this, there have been some bumps on the way. We have, move to the next slide, please. We have learned along the way. We have also improved along the way. And whilst most of the time there are a lot of challenges here and there proposed as barriers to advancing meaningful youth engagement, adolescent and youth engagement, for us, some of the key challenges that we would say can sometimes hinder meaningful youth participation. Of course, one of them is funding. And like the Amy mentioned earlier, for you to advance meaningful youth engagement, it must be intentional, it must be strategic, and it must go beyond a specific project cycle. And so most of the time when you start with just a particular project, and for example, you set a youth advisory board for one specific project, what it will mean is that it would not be sustained beyond that project cycle. And so when meaningful youth engagement or a particular strategy for meaningful youth engagement is tied towards that one activity, or either done as a pilot or as an interim measure, and tied to one funding mechanism, sometimes either scaling up or sustaining such strategy becomes challenging. And also, to be able to truly meaningfully engage young people, you have to be very inclusive. And this might also require you reaching beyond the easiest to reach. For example, setting up a board made up of maybe 50% of people in the country capital, because then it would reduce cost of transport, cost of meeting engagement, or certain categories of young people that may be more expensive to engage. And so that can even limit the diversity or the inclusivity of your strategy for youth engagement. And most of the time, I think Amy mentioned this earlier, when you are advancing meaningful youth engagement strategies and it is not well understood or appreciated by leadership, it can be seen as something that is slow to achieving results. And so, for example, you would need to be patient. For example, if first build the capacity of the young people that you have engaged, because they would not always come, young people will not always come having the brightest idea or having the skills to either do proposal development, contribute meaningfully to conceptualization, or even material development. You would need to intentionally include the capacity building process, and that can take some time for you to actually get to a point where that particular strategy or the young people that you are engaging begin to contribute meaningfully. The easiest way would be to always engage young people who are already well capacitated by different organizations, and so it's easier for them to quickly become transformative for your organization. But that also limits other young people's chance, or young people who could become the next youth leaders that would contribute meaningfully to your organization's programming. And so having that long-term vision and having that patience.
Unfortunately, I think we lost your connection, Effie. Can you still hear us? Okay, so apologies, audience. While we are waiting for Essie to reconnect, how about we go straight into question and answer. Essie, are you back? Okay. So, but thank you, Essie, for really sharing a deep dive on
programming. And
hello, Essie, are you back?
Yes. Sorry, did you lose me?
Yes, we lost you. But if you want to wrap up very quickly, then we move into questions and answers.
Yes. So I was saying that meaningful youth engagement has both short-term and long-term benefits for any organization. Whilst in the short term, you get young people's engagement being truly transformative for your organization to advance responsive programming. In the long term, you have a cohort of future leaders who appreciate, especially in our SRHL sector that is quite stigmatized. You get the next generation of leaders who are appreciate the dynamics of reproductive health and other socioeconomic sectors, and can become leaders that would gracefully advance your organizational objective and vision. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Once again, Essie, for sharing your experience from Ghana. And so let's move into the questions and answers and of the Q&A session. We received an interesting number of questions, and with limited time, we may not be able to get to your specific question, but we will look at it and then provide a written response to you as part of this recording package. So let me ask the first question to Alan, if you will. And we received a question that asks about, let me see. It looked at the issue of how young people might be able to deal with, or how the programs might be able to best deal with addressing access to sexual and reproductive health services for youth with disabilities. It's a big issue in this context, and I want to know how that can be done, especially when we think of youth with disabilities facing double limitations and discrimination. Alan, can you reflect on this question, please?
Thank you so much, Sylvia. That is a very important question, and one of the main reasons for the SPG having outlined these 5 steps is specifically to address the intersectional identities of young people. We acknowledge that young people with disabilities are disproportionately affected in terms of lack of access to sexual and reproductive health services. And that's why, for example, programs that aim to target young people with disabilities, when they are determining which youth to engage, they need to be very intentional about engaging young people with disabilities and youth-led organizations that, are mainly, whose membership is mainly focused on young people with disabilities. This strategic planning guide aims to guide those program managers that aim to reach or achieve an impact within the population of young people with disabilities, to ensure that they are reaching out those that they want to impact, in order to make sure that they not only capture the ideas, but they collaborate together and work together to implement responsive programs that will address the root causes that are preventing young people with disabilities from accessing essential sexual and reproductive health services. So that is why this guide is very intentional about, asking organizations to intentionally decide on which group of young people they want to engage, considering the vast diversity within the youth population. And of course, throughout the partnerships, providing ongoing support to those organizations, those youth-led organizations from young people with disabilities, that will be collaborating and partnering equitably with other organizations implementing these programs and projects, and also providing specific funding for these organizations to lead on their own activities and initiatives that will, of course, impact them the most. So I don't have, that's something that the SPG is not a recipe for every single program, but a guide for all programs to adjust, readjust, and assess on how to, execute these main building blocks on how to do or meaningful adolescent and youth engagement and partnership well.
Great, thank you so much, Alan. And certainly, it's a crucial population group that cannot be left behind. And similarly, we received another question, and I'd like to ask Amy of USAID this question. And the audience member says, "Thank you for this presentation. It's easier programming for in-school adolescents than out-of-school adolescents, given the viable structures in place in schools." So how can impactful programs be planned with out-of-school adolescents in poor resource settings, given that ASRH is a fundamental right for everyone? Amy, over to you. Thank you.
That's a great question. And certainly, of course, what works in one country is not going to work in every country. But there are some opportunities. I think what's most important is to reach youth where they are. Doing our best to go to them instead of asking them to come to us is going to be much more effective. So of course, school is one of those ways of going to where they are, because a large number of young people are in school, but then also a very large number, as the questioner notes, are out of school. So, looking to doing programs at markets where young people find themselves, at youth clubs. There are a lot of times there are youth clubs that are not school-based. It's sports programming. Holding some sort of an event after a community event, like tying it to some kind of a community event that's regular. And working with the local officials to partner more effectively on those kinds of community events. Quite often there are district health teams that are also trying to reach youth. It might be for health, it might be for education, it might be for a number of things. But linking to those activities is important. And also, in many of the low and middle income countries in which we work, there's other youth programming happening. There's democracy and governance programming happening. There's employment programming happening. There's, lots of other opportunities that we can begin to partner better, coordinate better, and bring our whether it's comprehensive sexuality education or any other kind of work into those spaces. And of course, giving young people voice in how those programs are created is going to be important, not only created, but also how they're delivered and how they're evaluated. So these are just a couple of examples of finding ways to not compete with our other development partners for the same youth in the same community, but work together. I hope that helps.
Great, thank you, Amy. And truly, it's about being where young people are and co-designing with them, and not having these perhaps unconscious bias or deliberate structures that stand in the way. So thank you so much for that comment.
Oh, one more thing, digital. Don't forget digital. It won't reach everyone, but it's another great opportunity to reach more.
Absolutely. And then we have one question for Essie, and it is for MSA Ghana. Is the Youth Advisory Board part of the organization or operates independently?
So the Youth Advisory Board is considered part of the organization. They are not a separate body. They are, like I said earlier, beyond their own work plan or mandate that they would operate. They are also integrated across several departmental committees. And even though they are not staff necessarily, they are volunteers, but they are part of the organization's advocacy structure.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for that clarification. We have a follow-up question actually for you, Amy. I think probably because you represent USAID, and I think it's an important question because sometimes people think of youth programming for youth because of the age range, but then we also know that young people aren't just quote unquote 15 or 10 to 24, but they have other parts of it. I mean, they have very active lives. And so the question is this, that besides age bias, what else might hold institutions back from initiating or expanding their meaningful youth and adolescent engagement portfolio, even when the best of intentions exist? It's a really great question.
It is a great question, and I will give my personal answer as opposed to voicing that from the agency itself. But I think there's both inherent biases that are known and unknown, and some of them are indeed about age, but some of them are about expertise. We all have been working in this space for quite a long time, and there is something to be said for wisdom and experience. but perhaps that power hierarchy of experience or expertise, regardless of age, holds people back. In order for us to be more inclusive, and this is something that our office is looking at and our agency is looking at in our DEIA efforts, being more inclusive recognizes that not everyone is going to have the same level of education because of structural issues that have held them back, both costs and reach, and whether or not they've had the opportunities. So levels of education, levels of experience, we have to start thinking differently about what counts as experience in the work that we do. So maybe someone doesn't have a certain degree that would normally be a part of recruitment, but they have great life experience, they have great other kinds of experience. And so varying those opportunities to look at what young people of all ages bring to this work is going to be important. So I'd say gender gets in the way, socioeconomic status gets in the way, all your regular biases get in the way of bringing young people into the work. But I think probably age and experience are the two that hold us back the most. So, it's difficult to build capacity at the same time as having high expectations of results. And I think Essie pointed this out, there's lots of opportunities for us to build young people, but to also be patient as we do that. The results will be worthwhile at the end.
Great, thank you, Amy, for those reflections. Great, thank you, Amy, for these reflections. And certainly, it's not just the quote unquote resume or the credentials, but the true lived experience that adds so much value to what's impactful and what matters with young people. So thank you for sharing those reflections. I want to, before we move on, I know we're at time, but I would love to ask both Essie and Alan if they want to say one last thing before we move towards our conclusion, just one final remark. Essie, we'll go with you first. I mean, what is one last takeaway you wish to share with the audience before we conclude? Start with Essie and then Alan.
All right, thank you. So like Amy just shared, meaningful youth engagement can be is very transformative and great for organization, but we need to move beyond also sometimes thinking what's in for us as an organization and think about what we could do to support young people and ensure that they are also we reap a maximum dividend from them when we engage them, being intentional about building the capacity of the next generation of young leaders, and also moved beyond programmatic engagement to also work in the talk of meaningful youth engagement across our organizational leadership portfolio. For MSI, we are challenging ourselves with specific country-specific target indicators for inclusive leadership towards 2030. But all organizations need to challenge themselves. We have seen that meaningful youth engagement help us in our programs. We have engaged youth leaders in the past, and we know that most young people, when given the right tools and resources, can actually deliver the tasks. We need to now move beyond programs, volunteers, and actually engage young staff that we have, build their capacity to take up leadership roles. And that is when we can truly say that we are meaningfully, for me, engaging young people across all levels. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Essie. And then the final word, please, from Alan. What is the one word or few words takeaway you'd like our audience members to leave?
Well, if we want to do meaningful adolescent and youth engagement well, we definitely need to start with a strategy. And this guide will help organizations do strategically their engagement and partnerships with young people. So I invite you all to read through the guide, provide feedback as well to the guide, and consider that this is a guide that will help you do the strategy, and build the building blocks that your organization, project, and programs need to engage and partner with young people meaningfully. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Certainly there's a strategic process and building blocks to make that all happen. So you'll see on the slides, we have additional resources. So the recording will be shared, but please access these dedicated adolescent-specific HIPs. They're available for you and they're downloadable. And one last plug, we know that we're marching towards ICFP, the 2022. We will have the IBP track program implementation. So if you're able to be in Thailand for the ICFP, please certainly attend, participate, and bring your voices and your experiences to the different events being organized by the IBP, as you can see above. So thank you so much, everyone, for your participation. It was a truly live and interactive event. We want to thank you all for sharing your questions, your ideas, and most of all, thank you to the presenters and the organizers for this wonderful webinar that we are now concluding. So thank you, everyone, and wishing all of you a wonderful rest of your day, your evening, and your week.